The boardroom smelled like fresh coffee and bad decisions. I remember thinking that as I sat at the far end of the long glass table, my laptop open, my notes organized the way I always organized everything. Color-coded, time-stamped, ready. 23 people in that room. Half of them had been hired because of me. The other half reported to my husband. He walked in at exactly 9, the way he always did. Jacket pressed, expression unreadable, phone already in his hand. He didn't look at me. That should have been my first sign. My husband is the kind of man who fills a room without trying. Tall, composed, the sort of person who makes eye contact with everyone except the one person he should. We'd built Caldwell and Reeve Consulting together. His name first because he'd insisted. Back when I was still the kind of woman who let things like that. That was 8 years ago. I was 31 then. I thought it was romantic, honestly. Two people building something from nothing. I thought the name order was a small thing. I stopped thinking it was a small thing about 3 years in. By the time that Tuesday morning came around, I was the one who managed our top 6 client accounts. I was the one who had rebuilt the Vancouver portfolio after we lost Henderson Group in 2022. I was the one who flew to Calgary every other month to keep the Brennan account alive when my husband couldn't be bothered to answer emails past 5 o'clock. Our revenue had grown 42% in 2 years. I know because I built the report that showed it. He cleared his throat. He put a single page on the table. Before we get into Q3, he said, there are some structural changes I need to walk everyone through. I didn't reach for the paper. Someone slid it down to me. I picked it up. It was a compensation review. Every name on it was being reviewed for a salary adjustment, downward. My name was second from the top, not because I was underperforming. The note beside my name said role restructuring, position reclassified as senior associate. I had been the director of client relations for 4 years. And in one page, without a single conversation beforehand, my husband had reclassified me into a role that paid $38,000 less a year. I looked up at him. He was already looking at the next slide. I sat there for the full hour. I didn't say a word. I wrote 3 things in my notebook: the date, the page number of the compensation document, and the name of our company lawyer, who happened to be a woman I'd introduced my husband to at a fundraiser in 2019. Then I closed my laptop, thanked the catering team on the way out, and went back to my office. I had 14 minutes before my next call. I used 13 of them to forward every client file I'd originated to my personal encrypted drive. Not stolen, mine. I had the email chains, the original proposals, the signed NDAs where my signature came first. When you build something, you keep receipts. My mother taught me that. She ran a cleaning company in Mississauga for 22 years, and she never once let a check leave without a copy. On the 14th minute, I called Brennan Group in Calgary. My contact there, a sharp woman who'd been asking me for 6 months whether I was ever going to go independent, picked up on the second ring. I might have some news soon, I said. She laughed. She already knew what kind of news it would be. That night I waited until my husband got home. He came in at 7:30, loosened his tie, went straight to the kitchen. I was already at the table. I'd made pasta, the kind he liked, with the sun-dried tomatoes he always picked out of everything else, but ate fine when they were mixed in. I don't know why I made it. Force of habit, maybe. Or maybe I wanted to give him one last chance to say something. He sat down, he served himself. He talked about traffic on the Gardiner. I let him finish half his plate. I want to talk about this morning, I said. He set down his fork. It's a structural decision, Waverly. It's not personal. My name is Waverly Reeve. Half the company is named after me, and he was sitting across from me, telling me that removing my title and cutting my salary by $38,000 was not personal. You didn't tell me, I said. Not a conversation, not a heads up. You put my name on a list and slid it across a table in front of 23 people. I didn't think you'd react like this. I picked up my fork. I finished my dinner, I said. I'm not reacting. I'm telling you what happened. He said I was being emotional. He said the restructuring was necessary for the company's optics. Something about investor expectations. Something about not wanting it to look like he was playing favorites with his wife. I remember the word optics very clearly, because it was the moment I understood that he had thought about this. He had considered it, decided it, and concluded that my humiliation was an acceptable cost of his presentation. I washed the dishes. He went to watch something in the den. I went upstairs, opened my laptop, and started writing. I wrote for 2 hours. When I was done, I had a letter of resignation, a summary of every client account I had originated or sustained, a calculation of the revenue attributable to my direct efforts over the past 4 years, just shy of $2.8 million, and a note to myself that said, simply, don't second-guess this in the morning. I didn't. I emailed the resignation at 7:45 a.m. I CC'd our HR manager, our company lawyer, and the chair of our advisory board, who had been my mentor before he was ever my husband's contact. I walked into the office at 8:30, collected the things that were mine, my external monitor, a small succulent I'd been nursing for 2 years, the framed photo of my mother at her own company's 10-year anniversary, and I left. My husband was in a call. I didn't interrupt. The receptionist, a young woman named Bex who'd been with us 8 months and had once told me quietly that she hoped to be me someday, watched me walk past with my box. I stopped and put my hand on her arm and said, "Don't let anyone tell you that keeping your head down is the same as being respected." She nodded. I think she understood more than I meant her to. I drove to a cafe on Queen Street West, ordered a flat white, and called my sister. My sister is 4 years older than me and has approximately zero patience for what she calls romantic mythology, by which she means the stories women tell themselves about the men they've chosen. She had been skeptical of my husband since our second Christmas together, when he'd interrupted me 3 times during one dinner conversation, and she'd counted out loud. "Tell me everything," she said. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, what do you need from me?" That's the thing about people who love you properly. They don't say "I told you so." They say, "What do you need?" What I needed was a desk in her spare room in a week without anyone asking me how I was doing in that particular tone of voice. She gave me both. The first day I spent mostly staring at the wall and eating crackers. I'm not too proud to admit that. I'd given 8 years of my life to that company. I'd given more than that to my husband. There's a grief in walking away from something you built, even when the walking away is right, even when it's necessary. You still mourn the version of the future you thought you were building. On the second day, I started calling clients. Not poaching. I want to be clear about that, because the distinction matters and because I'm the kind of person who thinks it matters. I wasn't calling to solicit business from accounts that still belonged to Caldwell and Reeve. I was calling to say that I was moving on, to thank them for the relationship, and to leave the door open. 6 of them asked me directly what I was planning to do next. 4 of them told me, unprompted, that their loyalty had been to me specifically, not the firm. One of them, a developer out of Waterloo I'd been working with for 3 years, said, "Waverly, I've been waiting for you to do this. Send me a contract." I didn't have a contract yet. I went back to my sister's spare room and started drafting one. On the morning of the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I recognized the area code. It was the building where our office was located. I let it ring. It rang again 20 minutes later, then a 3rd time. I answered on the 4th call. It was our HR manager. Her voice was careful, professional, exactly the way HR voices get when someone upstairs has asked them to make a call they don't want to make. "Waverly," she said, "there's been some concern about the transition. A few accounts have flagged some questions about continuity, and—" "Which accounts?" I asked. She told me. "Every single one I'd called." "I see," I said. "What specifically does the firm need from me?" "There's a request for you to come in, to discuss a potential arrangement." She couldn't quite say the word return. I noticed that. "I'm available Thursday afternoon," I said. 2 o'clock. "Please confirm the meeting with your director of HR and a representative of the advisory board, not just my husband." There was a pause. "Of course," she said. I hung up and sat very still for a moment. Then I texted my sister. They called. She texted back 3 seconds later. "I know. I heard you get quiet. What time Thursday?" I smiled. It was the first time I'd smiled in 3 days, and it felt strange and good at the same time, like using a muscle you forgot you had. Thursday came gray and cold, the way Toronto October always does. That particular shade of overcast that makes the lake look like pewter. I wore the navy blazer I'd bought myself for my 37th birthday. The one my husband had said was too formal for a regular workday. I took the subway because parking downtown is a tax on optimism, and I stood the whole way because the car was full, and I didn't mind. I was thinking about my mother again. She used to say that the only time you really know what something is worth is when you walk away from it and see whether it follows you. The meeting was in the same boardroom. I appreciated the irony of that, or maybe they hadn't thought about it. My husband was there, along with our HR manager, our company lawyer, and, this mattered, the advisory board chair. He gave me a look when I walked in that I can only describe as measured respect, the kind that acknowledges you've done something difficult correctly. My husband stood up when I entered. I hadn't expected that. He looked tired. Not the tired of one bad week, but the tired of someone who has spent 3 days realizing something they'd been avoiding for longer than that. I felt something in my chest that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite satisfaction. It was more complicated than either. I sat down. Our company lawyer slid a document across the table. Counter offer. Reinstatement at direct level, salary restored. Plus a formal co-director title that had never existed before. One that would require my husband's signature alongside mine on any major client restructuring decisions and go forward. I read every line. The room was quiet. Waverly, my husband said. His voice was different. Quieter. I handled this badly. Yes, I said. You did. He stopped. He tried again. I didn't want to acknowledge how much of this was yours, and that was wrong. I've thought about this moment a lot since then. What I wanted to say was a long and detailed accounting of every overlooked contribution, every meeting where my ideas came out of his mouth, every client dinner where I'd done the work and he'd received the credit. I had that entire speech ready. I had rehearsed it in my sister's spare room at 2 a.m. while the house was quiet and I was too tired to sleep. I didn't give it. Not because I was being the bigger person. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't nobility. It was strategy. Because I'd realized in those 3 days that what I actually wanted wasn't an apology. What I wanted was a structure that made apologies unnecessary going forward. The paperwork in front of me was closer to that than any speech would be. I looked at the document again. Then I looked at our lawyer. I need 2 changes, I said. She had a pen ready. She'd been waiting for me to say exactly that. The first change was a clause stipulating that any further changes to my role, title, or compensation required 90 days written notice and a full board review. The second was that my name came first on the co-director designation. Both changes were reasonable. Both were accepted before I'd finished explaining them. I signed at 4:47 p.m. My husband signed after me. We walked out of the building separately. I went back to my sister's place to pick up my things. She'd already ordered Thai food and opened a bottle of Ontario Red that had been sitting in her rack since last Christmas. We sat at her kitchen table and ate pad thai out of the containers, and didn't say anything very profound for a long time. Are you okay? She asked eventually. I thought about it properly, the way the question deserved. I think I'm different, I said. Not okay in the way I was before. Different okay? She nodded. She understood that. I went back to work the following Monday. My name went first on the new door signage. 2 weeks later, the Waterloo developer signed a contract with Caldwell and Reeve. Not because I'd solicited him, but because he'd heard, through the industry, that I was back. And that things had changed. He told me later that he'd actually drafted a proposal to bring to a competitor before my return was confirmed. He said he'd decided to wait. That's the thing nobody tells you when you walk away from something you built. Sometimes the walking away is the only language powerful enough to make people understand what you were actually worth to them. Not the meetings, not the reports, not the revenue numbers in a slide deck. The absence. The sudden silence where your work used to be. My mother closed her cleaning company the year she turned 62, on her own timeline when she was ready. She'd spent 22 years making sure that every client knew her name, not just the company name. When she retired, 4 of them sent flowers. 2 of them sent handwritten letters. I kept one of those letters. I have it on my desk now, next to the succulent. Some mornings my husband comes in early and we have coffee together before anyone else arrives. We don't always talk about work. Sometimes we don't talk at all. Just 2 people who've been through something difficult, sitting in the same room, figuring out what comes next. It's not a perfect story. I'm not sure I wanted a perfect story. I wanted my name on the door, my signature on the contracts, and a seat at the table that nobody could take back without a full board review. I have all 3 now.